So welcome everybody. Thanks so much for being with us here today. My name is Dominic and I'm the Executive Director of the Transcap Initiative. For those of you who don't know us yet, our mission is to build the field of systemic investing. And we do that through collaborative projects that span three areas of work. Research and conceptual development, which is about the theoretical underpinnings of systemic investing. Prototyping, which is about putting the theory into practice, both through our own projects, but also by conducting case studies of other pioneers in the field. And then a range of activities that we summarize as field building. So that's education, convening, advocacy, and storytelling. We're organized as a nonprofit organization. We operate as a multi-stakeholder open innovation initiative. So everything we do is collaborative and is published and made available to others. If you want to learn more about what we do and who we do it with, you're most welcome to obviously visit our website, but we also run a monthly Meet the TCI webinar, which is one of the main entry points for engaging with us. Now, you're here today to learn more about the basic concepts of systemic investing and how they're being put into practice through Builders Vision's Oceans team. Before we delve into that, let's first talk about why this new investment logic that we call systemic investing is needed. And the main answer to the why question is one about a mismatch. On the one side of this mismatch, we have the nature of societal issues, the need for systems transformation, and the way systems transformation happens. And on the other side of that mismatch, we have the way that traditional forms of purpose-driven finance shows up to the challenge, traditional forms of impact investing, philanthropy, and public finance. So let me explain that in slightly more detail. At the TCI, our starting point is the observation that most environmental and social issues are complex systemic challenges, and that in order to address these, we need a particular quality of change, not incremental change of the kind you tend to get with simple technology substitution, but deep and structural change to the way we organize and operate our food, energy, mobility, industrial and urban systems, or what some call systems transformation. We then take it as given that transformative change is not the result of a single technology, a single company, or a single social enterprise, but typically results from the combined effects of a great many shifts happening within a system. To trigger those shifts, we need to enable a myriad of interventions that tackle different levers of change. And these interventions tend to have their own funding needs. Some are perfectly investable with market rate investment capital. Some require concessional financing, some require grants or public subsidies, a change in the tax code, or risk transfer mechanisms like new insurance products or advanced market commitments for corporations. So the strategic imperative in systems change work becomes one of matching different kinds of capital, often from different sources of capital providers, to different kinds of interventions. Now, traditional forms of purpose-driven finance sits in tension with each of these boxes. It sees the world as linear, predictive, and atomized, favors interventions that lead to incremental change, operates with what we call the single asset paradigm, so one investment at a time, where that one investment is the unit of analysis and transaction, typically deploys a single asset class, and works mostly in what we call context agnostic ways, in short-term ways and also with a competitive mindset. And all of these ways of working stand in tension with the boxes in the logic flow. So what's needed is an investment logic that is coherent with this flow, an investment logic that recognizes the world as complex and uncertain and adaptive, that strives for this transformative change, deep, structural, and irreversible, that builds strategic investment portfolios that are where the assets stand in synergistic relationship with each other, that deploys capital from across the spectrum and not just one particular type, and that works in very strategic and long-term collaborative and, importantly, contextualized investment programs. And that's exactly what systemic investing aspires to do. If you want to read more about this argument, the why behind systemic investing, have a look at our white paper that we published a few years ago, which makes that argument, and where you can find the details behind this thinking. The white paper is available on our website. Now, this leads us to the question of how exactly a systemic approach to capital deployment looks like. And this is what the hallmarks are meant to elucidate. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Jess, who will introduce these hallmarks to you.
Thanks. Yeah, let's go straight to the next slide. So here's a definition just to give people a bit of an anchor, start to kind of zoom in on more specifics. So we say systemic investing is the deployment of financial capital to transform human and natural systems with the intention of advancing environmental sustainability and social justice. So this is still pretty broad. It still kind of allows in a kind of very wide range of activities. So what we've done, what we published quite recently is a document on the hallmarks of systemic investing. So if we go to the next slide, we can show you the collection. So there's 16 of them, and we've designed some icons to help to start to convey what these things are. We appreciate that this is a lot, and we've people have suggested that it'd be good to have, 3 to 5, and that would be easier to get a handle on. But it's taken us a while to get to this point, and so far we feel like all of these are capturing something distinctive and important, and that they're not even trying to capture all of systems thinking. There's various aspects to systems thinking practice that we haven't included. We're trying to pinpoint the things that are really particularly relevant to investment processes. So on the next slide, we can just see the publication. If you're very quick, you can scan the QR code that will take you to the download. But it's easy to find on our website or our LinkedIn. So that's where all the detail is. And the focus just now today is just to briefly give you a sense of what they're talking about. We're not going to go through each of them in detail. So we've clustered them into a few groups. So you'll see the systems mindset icon there is coloured. This one kind of stands alone because it's so fundamental. It's a starting point that highlighting that the way you approach the work is absolutely fundamental to all of the other things. And that's a very capacious concept, systems mindset. We're still in the process of elaborating what that means, how it plays into investment processes. But that's a starting point for thinking about all of this work that shifts your perspective in the way that Dominic was just talking to. The next cluster is quite a few of them, so 2 to 9. Transformational intent it needs to be in place as a way of orienting the work, and we see that as something that's a North Star, fairly far horizon goal that we set within a systemic investing program. Then the rest of the hallmarks that are highlighted there are drawing on the analytical tools that are available through systems thinking and complexity. So taken together, they give a way of understanding a system and starting to think about how to strategize within that way of seeing the world and that analysis of a problem. One that I'll just highlight is the system financing needs, because I think that one is particularly distinctive to this area of work. And that's focusing in on what are the capital needs of the change that you're trying to describe. And we see that as a step that very rarely gets explored in existing financing approaches. So you can go into the document to read more, look at our blogs about what that entails. The next cluster, I think, is just one, which is coalition building and orchestration. So this importantly captures the sense that investors in systemic investing don't act alone in the way that maybe other investors do. There's a real element here of building coalitions and working across multiple players. So that might involve coordinating capital from multiple sources and multiple asset owners or managers or investors coming together to streamline their different kinds of capital into a shared solution space. And it also includes orchestration and coalition building across multiple types of actors. So it's investors alongside other actors within a system. The way that manifests can vary hugely across setting, but it's important that it's in there. The next cluster then is around I guess, the nitty-gritty detail of how do you operationalize this in terms of capital deployment. So we have a number of concepts that help to think in terms of, what's a conventional way of organizing, structuring capital, and how does that change in a systemic investing context. I think it's in the nesting and combinatorial effects hallmarks highlight that the purpose of that is around understanding that you're investing at multiple points within the same system. So you're aiming to create combinatorial effects between the different interventions that you're making, which is quite a big shift from conventional investment logic. And nesting is about being aware of how the work that you're doing interacts with and can be complemented by work in the broader system. The final hallmark is around measurement, learning, and sense making. And this is really highlighting that the structures that we build around creating the information flows of how do we understand the system? Once we start investing, how do you understand what's changing in the system? That also needs to be rooted in systems and complexity thinking, and redesigned away from conventional measurement approaches, which are more rooted in more kind of conventional investment and measurement frameworks. So that's all we're going to say. The hallmarks you'll see will come up again in relation to a few words. Just go to the next slide. Yes, I forgot about the structure diagram. So if you just go back one slide, this is also part of the publication on the hallmarks, and this will need, we're not going to go into this here. Just wanted to give a sense that the hallmarks are a way of understanding the components of what makes up systemic investing. We are currently working on a design guide that will start to put those hallmarks into a process. So this structure diagram starts to place some of them in relation to each other, but there's a lot more to say, and we're still working on how to make these ideas as tangible and usable as possible. So again, go to that publication to see the structure diagram and see how these things start to fit together. So moving on to the case studies, I'll just say a few words about why we engaged in this work, why we spent time writing a case study, and then we can move on to the example of Builders Vision. So we get asked a lot, because we talk about ideas quite a lot, it's really important to also talk about practice. So the case studies are a way of highlighting the work of existing organizations who may or may not describe their work in the language that we're using around systemic investing, but where we see huge resonance between the ideas that we're talking about and the work that's being done. So the case studies are a way of kind of capturing that and publishing it, getting it out to a wider audience, which also helps to just to communicate. It helps to elaborate and explain what this practice is. We've also found that the process of writing the case studies, of talking to people doing this work, is hugely valuable for us in testing and refining our own thinking about the hallmarks and refining what we're saying they are or they're not, where we draw boundary lines or conceptual distinctions. And the last point I'll make is just about how we approach them. So how we see these. They're not quite traditional research case studies. So we're using the hallmarks to structure the discussion. So they give us a way of picking out aspects of practice that really resonate with what we're talking about, without getting into whether something is or is not systemic investing. So there's always going to be elements that resonate strongly and other elements of work that don't resonate so strongly with what we're doing. So the hallmarks provide us with a way of making those distinctions and going into that detail. We've also got if you look at the case study document, the last section is about the food for thought section, as we've called it. And that's suggesting areas for the organizations that we're looking at where there's aspects of systemic investing practice that could be strengthened or emphasized more. And we frame that as a set of questions of what would it look like for things to move closer towards this this vision of systemic investing that we're working on. So again, that's something that isn't traditionally part of a case study research format, but that we think is a valuable way of creating a dialogue about what's happening at the moment, what could happen, how could things develop into the future. So I think with that, we'll now move over to the example of Builders Vision more specifically.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jess. So let's look at what operationalizing some of these hallmarks looks like in practice based on the Builders Vision ocean strategy. We'll start with some basics on Builders Vision for those of you who are not yet familiar with the organization. BV was launched in 2021 by Lucas Walton as an impact platform and family office. It focuses on 3 thematic areas: oceans, food and agriculture, and energy. And within each of these areas, BV deploys financial capital, supports partners in strategic ways, and does advocacy. There are several structures that BV operates with, and the ones most relevant for our discussion today are a tax-exempt foundation, an LLC, from which most of the concessionary investments are made, and 3 donor-advised funds. Direct investments in that space tend to be in the range of 500,000 to 3 million, and fund investments tend to be in the range of 2 to 5 mil. And oftentimes, BV investments are catalytic, for instance, because they're the first investor to commit to a fund or a company, or just by virtue of their reputation. And then on the philanthropic side, BV makes about 150 million US dollar in grants per year. If you want to learn more about BV as an organization, obviously visit their website, but also have a look at their impact report, which is a wonderful resource and provides a lot of detail behind the thinking and some of the work that we are going to highlight today. So double-clicking on the ocean strategy, which Peter and James oversee. BV Oceans works with what they call a North Star, transformational intent, which is set for 2050. And it is to ensure that healthy ocean ecosystems become a pillar of global environmental recovery, climate security, and economic growth. At the most basic level, the ocean strategy focuses on tackling 3 challenges that stand in the way of realizing this vision: insufficient availability of financial capital, a general lack of understanding of oceans among stakeholders, and weak enabling conditions. And those include things like labor markets for blue economy jobs or the policy environment. BV Oceans goes about tackling these challenges with what we describe as a 3-dimensional approach that prioritizes key themes such as fisheries, aquaculture, and plastics, key actions, and different types of financial capital. And we'll see how these things play out in a minute. So in terms of the actual hallmarks that Jess introduced before, let's start with 2, the concepts of theory of transformation and transition pathways. On the right, you can see a framework with which BV Oceans connects what it does with what it wants to achieve. And you probably can't read the fine print, but that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is to get a sense of the architecture of this diagram. So in the middle sits the North Star. And on the outermost ring sits the prioritized actions for each of the key themes. In between the middle and the outermost ring sit a set of short-term and long-term outcomes that sort of build a logical bridge between input and impact, between what BV Oceans does and what it wants to achieve. And this logical bridge then starts to speak to the idea of transition pathways, of this idea of how systems might undergo transformation towards specific visions of the future. And given that most socio-technical systems are complex and adaptive, these transition pathways are typically hypotheses. But they still help to give a sense of how change might unfold and therefore are useful in establishing a coherence between goals and strategies. The real standout hallmarks for us when it comes to BV Oceans is the way the team has designed a multi-capital investment architecture and uses that to construct a strategic investment portfolio that acts directly on the levers of change shown in the previous diagram. So in the table at the top, you can see the role that grants and investments play for certain type of activities. So for instance, investment capital is the main play for innovation in blue products and solutions, and the policy work is mostly funded with grants. And the overall picture that emerges is of a thoughtful approach to thinking through which types of capital can be useful for enabling which types of interventions, which is exactly what sits at the heart of this idea of multi-capital investment architectures. The bottom part of the graphic, the bottom table, shows sector-wide influencing tactics that BV uses in service of its North Star goal. And those activities include advocacy with policymakers, media campaigns, and thought leadership. They're mostly funded with internal resources for where BV employees are directly involved in delivering some of these activities, or with grants if third-party organizations are involved. And sometimes BV taps into even non-financial forms of capital, such as social and political capitals that some of the leaders of inside BV possess. Now, to make this really tangible for you, let's look at what actually sits inside this strategic investment portfolio. At the time of writing the case study, there were somewhere on the order of 160 investees and grantees. I'm not sure I got that number right, but Peter and James can confirm that BV Oceans has supported. And clearly creating a slide with all of these logos would not be practical. So here's a selection. On the top line, in terms of investments, just to give you a sense of what's in there. Ocean Rainforest develops technology for sustainable seaweed agriculture. Oceanium produces seaweed-based ingredients for food and health products. Coral Vita offers a reef restoration service. E-Concrete develops nature-aligned construction materials for oceans. And Hohonu develops sensors and software for water monitoring. So you can see different levers of change at play: technologies, products, services, physical infrastructure, and ecosystem components. And then on the bottom, for the grant side, BV has supported the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance to develop a financing facility to crowd in more capital into the ocean space. It has funded research at Bigelow Lab into CO2 sequestration of seaweed. It has funded consumer awareness work conducted by the Food for Climate League. And the thing I'm most excited about is it has made a contribution to the 3-part documentary Hope in the Water to educate the public and shift social norms. So this overview gives you a sense of how diverse that portfolio is and how it relates to BV Ocean's transformational intent and the theory of transformation introduced at the beginning. Now, everything you've heard so far is descriptive. It's factual information about what happens inside BV Oceans. The case study also contains 2 chapters that are meta-level reflections. One is on some of the lessons that the BV Oceans team has learned over time. And I want to showcase 2 here. The first relates to the hallmark of system mindset. When BV started its oceans work, the sustainable blue economy was virtually non-existent. And over time, and in large parts because of Builders Vision's activities, the system of the sustainable blue economy has started to emerge and even mature in some geographies, at least insofar as capital deployment is concerned. So in response to these developments, the BV Oceans team has adjusted its focus. Whereas in the beginning, the focus was in part heavily on Europe, they have since started to shift to Southeast Asia and other geographies where the sustainable blue economy is still reliant on catalytic finance. To greater degrees, that's the case in Europe. And whereas their focus in the beginning was heavy on sort of venture capital or other forms of early stage risk capital, they're now starting to focus more on other forms of capital, more representative of a maturing system, such as infrastructure finance for building out the food processing capacity in the middle of the ocean food supply chain. And both of these adjustments speak to this idea of systems mindset, an understanding that systems evolve and that strategies need to be adapted over time in response to what a system of interest needs at any given moment. The second lesson learned that we want to highlight speaks to the topic of system boundaries. The ocean system is vast, global in nature, and that raises all sorts of questions of how to bound it and where to operate. For instance, one of the big enablers of the uptake of blue economy innovation is policy. But ocean-relevant policies are made at the multilateral, national, regional, and even local level. So where do you intervene? Builders Vision could concentrate resources in specific places, but local work sits in tension with global work and it isn't necessarily scalable because BV can't operate in thousands of local contexts at the same time. So this is an example of a polarity inherent in systems work. And these polarities are very present in the Builders Vision Ocean strategy, and they create kind of an irresolvable challenge around how to calibrate interventions. As Jess mentioned, there's also a chapter we call Food for Thought, where Jess and I reflect back to the BV Oceans team some of the things that have come up for us as we wrote the study, in the spirit of inspiring introspection, possibly encouraging adjustments to the way of working. One point we picked up relates to the way BV collaborates with others. In general, our understanding and our observation is that the BV Oceans team works in highly collaborative and systems-aware manner. But the North Star and the theory of transformation have been developed mostly by its internal experts in collaboration with the BV management team. And decision-making about what to fund or invest in is mostly centralized under the BV umbrella. So in the case study, we're asking what could be gained if Builders Vision took an even more inclusive approach to agenda setting, strategy development, and perhaps even capital allocation decisions. The second sort of morsel of food for thought relates to the idea of combinatorial effects. Builders Vision has an enormously rich and diverse strategic portfolio in the ocean space, with hundreds, or at least more than 100 investees and grantees. And there are efforts at bringing those different organizations together, including through an annual conference. And yet we felt and actually heard from some of the stakeholders we interviewed that there might be even more strategic synergies to be generated across the portfolio. So in the case study, we're asking what could be gained if the full portfolio were made visible to everybody in the BV ecosystem, and if grantees and investees were brought together for collaboration in a highly strategic and systematic way. Before we transition to the fireside chat, a few final thoughts. BV Oceans is not necessarily a pure and perfect example of this stylized form of systemic investing that Jess introduced, or at least not yet anyway, but it's a triumph, and it's a quantum leap from where impact investing and philanthropy stands today. What also has become very apparent for us during the process is that this work is hard. It's difficult to be a pioneer, and if you stick your neck out, often you don't know what you're doing. And working in systems, just generally, is really challenging. So we commend Peter and James and the rest of the BV team involved in this for blazing the trail, because what they're doing is urgently needed, not only in oceans, but in other socio-technical systems as well. So there's a lot to learn from them and their pioneering efforts and the efforts of other pioneers in the field. So enough from us. Let us, in fact, now hear from the protagonists. They're still around. Peter and James, welcome. And again, thank you so much for blazing the trail of systemic investing. Let's start easy. Tell us a little bit about what you personally enjoy about working in this way.
Well, maybe I'll start just saying, Dominic, going through the experience of doing the case study with you has been really, I think, transformational for us because it's um it's made us, I think more systematically about what we're doing with the rigor of the theory that you guys have developed, you and Jess and team have developed at Transcap. And so for me, one of the great things is I so appreciate what you said at the end that we're helping to lead a movement, but we haven't fully figured it out. And we didn't even call it systemic investing until you called it systemic investing. And so, I think that has been helpful for us as we think about continuing to iterate our program and our strategies. And that makes it super exciting. Like I'm older than I should be, but the reality is that to be able to continue to learn is super powerful. And so for me, like the this process has been much more than just a case study and an example for us because it's actually helped us continue to get better and to think a little bit more systematically about the way that we work and how to continuously improve. So that's a super powerful thing for me. I also will just say because James is just an incredible partner institutionally. You get both sides of the coin. I'm wearing a t-shirt and a hat, and he looks like professional, and that's two sides of the coin with Builders Vision. But it's really powerful that he has been a partner all along the way because his investment knowledge is something that I didn't have. And that was really powerful as a grant maker to start to think about investing and deploying capital in new ways and having the power of another person to work with that could think creatively about how we put multiple forms of capital to work in service to trying to make improve the state of the oceans and mobilize more money into something that we care so much about.
And from my side, as Peter said, we always haven't been the most systematic about what we're doing because this really started as a small experiment. In late 2019, Peter was getting started thinking a little bit more about creative investing in the area, and I just got tagged in to help because they felt they needed someone from the investment side. And the beauty of Builder's Vision is we always get to experiment and iterate. So we don't have to lock into these multi-year board-approved either grant-making strategies or play like a lot of the venture or private equity players who have to work over 10-year fund cycles and they can't react and think about what's happening within the systems we're working on. And so now that we are targeting being a systematic investor instead of just thinking high level, what do we need for this market to develop, or what do we need to help transform a market that exists? We are tremendously excited about where we get to go right now.
Wonderful. So sometimes, the way I explain our work to others is that we're not so much inventing systemic investing rather than sort of formalizing it. And by doing so, we draw on existing frameworks and approaches and experiences of others, of pioneers in the field, and we try and synthesize that into a formalized approach. And we do that because that can become a cornerstone of a field. So we name it, we give it shape, we bring language to it so that people can describe their work and then talk to others about it. But we're also cognizant that the BV Oceans work predated almost any publication of the TCI, let alone a formal articulation of systemic investing. Why do you think you organically landed on this approach? Whether, no matter how you called it, but why do you think you sort of, you landed where you landed with the Oceans program?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very organic story, Dominic. I remember back before Builders Vision even existed, I started doing some work with Lucas Walton around impact investing for oceans. And it was very much like, oh, this is another form of capital that we could put to work in trying to create the future that we want to see in the world in terms of healthy oceans and sustainability. And it felt to me like a new tool in the toolbox. And so the very first investment that we ever made was in a fund called the Malloy Fund, which was focused on sustainable fisheries and aquaculture in Indonesia and the Philippines back in 2018. And we had a team of people. The Malloy Fund folks, I think, even know this, but we had a team of people, investment and philanthropic professionals, look at that opportunity, and we actually counseled him against investing in it. And he was like, let's do it anyway, and let's see what we can learn. And that was super powerful because he wanted to see how could we use a different financial tool in the toolbox. And so a lot of how this actually came about, I mean, when we launched Builders Vision in 2021, we actually started working on this in 2019, and I came over to help him think about his vision for the office and what he wanted to accomplish. And we knew we wanted to do philanthropic work, and we knew we wanted to do venture capital work. And he had in his mind that S2G was going to expand beyond food and ag into energy and oceans investing in a VC sense. And he said something to me at one point along the way, and he said, "What is your biggest fear about launching S2G Oceans?" And I said, "I think I'm not fearful, but I think there's going to be a lot of stuff in between philanthropy and venture investing that we're going to miss if we just have a VC arm and a philanthropic arm." And he literally was like, "Well, then let's build something that can actually do stuff in between those two spaces." And that was really, really powerful. And that was the launch of the impact investment platform that James and I now manage. And it allows us to do fund investing. It allows us to do direct investing in companies like Ocean Rainforest and Coral Vita, as you pointed out in your slides. And it allows us to help support the ecosystem through partners like 1,000 Ocean Startups and some of these other, sort of systems enablers that help make and mobilize capital into the oceans economy. So that was a big driver, and it was a lot of it was driven just by Lucas's willingness to take risk and do things a little bit differently, because he wanted to see a future in which oceans are healthier as a result of capital.
Yeah, you make an interesting point there. That something that we see emerge as a pattern of the needs for strong leadership, for people who say, this may sound cheesy, but like Obama-esque, the yes we can work in this way, and feeling that sense of agency. James, do you want to build on what Peter said?
I think the only add is what's really interesting for us right now is we're trying to recreate this approach in our other sector areas. So with energy and food and agriculture, we're we're seeing what we think is a very successful start measured by direct impact measurements. And perhaps more important to us now is capital mobilized. And we're doing this pretty aggressively within the energy sector, thinking about a very different problem, just how do we scale proven technologies with a more appropriate type of capital, which is very topical right now for anyone who followed Northvolt, which failed 2 weeks ago. It was over $15 billion of what was considered the who's who of capital providers between large sovereign pools of money, government-backed stopped loans, and it wasn't because of a tech failure. And then with food and agriculture right now, we are thinking more about how we build a resilient food system, which every day, when we see more and more impacts of climate change globally impacting food systems, is becoming just tremendously top of mind and is something that most of the private capital pools out there can't address with their current mandates and structures. So I'd say that's the most exciting part about what we've learned so far and where we think we can go.
Wonderful. I have a follow-up question for you, but first I want to plug our Q&A functionality. So I'll ask a few more questions, and then we'll hand it over to the audience. And so if somebody from the audience has a question, there's a Q&A functionality that you should be able to access. So please post your question there, and then Madeline will pick from that list. James, from where you sit, you said that you're trying to bring this approach that you've pioneered in oceans to the food and ag and the energy sectors. In what ways might the approach need to be adapted based on, kind of the idiosyncratic starting point for both the food and ag system and the energy system, particularly from the sort of investment point of view? Are you going to do things exactly the same way as in oceans? It's going to look different in terms of like where you focus, what you fund, the types of, the asset classes you work with?
It'll be quite similar in that we're often going to be limited in funds that we can allocate to. And that's our preference as an office from an investment standpoint. We'd rather be allocating to a larger scale manager who can directly invest because we're a smaller team and we'd like to remain not a 10,000 person army of investment professionals, which would be the scale we'd need to be if we couldn't find managers. So like Oceans, we're going to be spending a lot of time with emerging managers, which can be very easy, but it could also be fairly time consuming because many of these professionals will be coming in from alternative backgrounds. Oceans, it's a very easy situation to describe most of the emerging venture and private equity like managers. You typically had a banker who was a marine biologist as a minor in their university studies, who, has had 15 years of a very hard career in financial services. And then they went home to the coastline they grew up sailing on every summer and realized they can see marine bleaching in their own old backyard. And then they go and launch an early stage venture fund because they correctly identified that early stage is where they probably need to be. Which is lovely, but they really don't have the skill set that we have when we think about just general climate venture-like investing. And so with energy, when we're thinking about the scale up of technology, it's very similar. You need much more boring type project engineers and developers coming in because that's the skill set to build these facilities that we're really trying to scale. This will be green cement, steel, petrochemicals. Food and agriculture, it's also a very similar system where you have a lot of practitioners who are not finding the financial professionals. And that would be, if we want to think about regenerative agriculture, we see many sharp folks who have run mid-sized commercial operations, and now they're realizing I could create a financial instrument to help everyone in this region that's working on the same type of transition. And this might be something like cover crop adoption in the Midwest in the US. They don't know how to find the financial professionals often that can help them the right way. So very similar problem that we'll have to take a similar approach of a lot of hands-on work with the managers. On the direct investment side, a lot of what we will have to be doing is similar in that it's going to be education of the existing pools of capital. We spend a lot of time working with generalist climate or just general earlier stage investors, educating them on things like why restorative aquaculture is an important subsector and why it has potential. It's a CPG play for some, it's a resilient food chain investment for others, and it's an economic development opportunities for others. Things like, biofouling in shipping, to most people interested in oceans, we've realized why shipping companies would care about that, why it's got potential benefits for the environment and for climate from an emission standpoint. But that's, just a really easy good example of something we have to spend a lot of time educating. And then when we zoom out, we've learned a lot about how do we map out our systems frictions, and we'll be translating that approach to our other areas. This could be something like just general workforce development within a subsector, and how do we support developing the right skill sets. This might take us 20 years to see the benefits of. It might take 4 years, but we're generally following the same playbook as we go forward, and we're building our teams around what we've done with oceans.
Just one more piece. So in the space of like labor force development, is that generally a place where you like, is it an investment play or is it mostly grant play for you, for what you see?
Mostly been grants. We did see one profit-seeking business out of Europe that was building a merchant marine type workforce that was looking to return money. And we were actually quite curious. The timing wasn't right for us, and they were a little bit further along than where we needed to be. But we have seen a workforce development example that seemed to be a really good balance of purpose and profit potential.
Yeah. Peter, anything to add from your side?
No, I mean, I think generally the big difference between food and ag and energy and oceans is that oceans is more nascent from an investment standpoint. And so the strategies for the office need to sort of take that into account. I mean, I think it's why I think some of what we're doing in oceans is so powerful, because we've been able to work across the capital spectrum to help put capital to work in a sector that has been very significantly under-resourced. But climate and energy, there are still important new things to develop in those sectors, and in food and ag as well. But they're just a little bit further along from an investment standpoint, and so the color of what we're doing is just a little bit informed by the maturity of the investment sectors, and I think that's an important consideration.
And given that maturity, how might your approach to collaboration with other investors look different? Because in oceans, you were a pioneer. The sustainable blue economy wasn't a thing. You were, the only kid on the block. In energy, that's a crowded space. What's your thoughts on like how you might pivot your approach to strategic collaboration in those sectors?
Well, with energy, it's still quite nascent. There are even less managers deploying capital the way we would like them to. Most have a very growth equity type mindset, come in at the Series B when they are building their first facility, usually alongside a large government grant pool for kind of half of the CapEx need. So it's not that different. I only, out of the energy portfolio, have really 2 managers that are aligned versus a suite of about 40 private fund managers that we would say are pure play sustainable oceans focused. Now, there are probably 3,000 managers in general climate tech that will look at hard tech and will invest in these companies in some way or form. So we're trying to come in, and because there's not many managers, we are directly investing. We're using a different type of security than equity. It's a hybrid between what we would call pre-infrastructure type debt and what the venture equity community looks like. And we're just simply trying to showcase that this can balance your returns in what we actually think is a more thoughtful approach in general from a pure play economic standpoint. So we come in and get a lot of downside protection while giving the company a lot of flexibility to be patient, which is the big problem when we're talking about building new facilities. It might take 2 years, the UN overrun, and it might take 4 years. And that's where a lot of these companies that have the VC-backed cap tables struggle. So I would say more simply, it's a demonstration approach. And now we've been doing this for 2 years. We are starting to see companies continue to raise capital after us, which we are taking as a positive signal. And now that we've had a few of these investments out there, probably effectively for 18 months or so, we're starting to get a lot more attention from the larger pools of capital. Some of the large insurance companies, through their own balance sheet investment teams, have been reaching out. So we're beginning to collaborate a little bit with them. Some of the other bigger family offices, which is really our #1 target, are, directly asking like, hey, can we see that security agreement? We're quite curious and we're thinking about a similar approach. And we view ourselves as friendly and hopefully transparent. So we have been sharing that pretty comfortably with a lot of parties, because we'd love for everyone to be at least taking a similar approach, if not joining us directly in that structure.
What is next for Oceans? I mean, so we can talk about what is next for Oceans for Builders Vision and what is next for Oceans at a larger scale. But I think, I'm super excited about, there seems to be a wave, if you will, of excitement around investing in Oceans that is starting to materialize with partners near and far. I think we're starting to see, some companies do well. We're starting to see some of our initial fund investments do well, and people are starting to recognize it as an investable sector, and that is super powerful and exciting. And with UN Oceans coming up in June of 2025 as the midpoint of the UN Oceans decade, I think there is a wave of excitement and enthusiasm around really leaning into this sector. And I'd love to see more institutional investors, more of the really large firms starting to actually pay attention and take seriously this sector as meaningful and important to invest in, because we need more VC money. We also need a lot of other things. We need debt financing. We need the power of guarantees. We just committed to the nature bond in the Bahamas. And it's actually it's a guarantee of financing if the government of the Bahamas defaults on the commitments that they've made to secure marine conservation outcomes in that country over 15 years. But that money stays in our bank account and we can invest it and we can continue to put it to good work. But it is a promise in the event of a bad outcome. And that is hopefully not going to happen, but another powerful way that we can put capital to work in a really meaningful and significant way. And I think there's just a huge opportunity in the ocean space around, continuing to mobilize capital in creative and really interesting ways. And for Builders Vision, that's sort of the mission that I'm on. I think, what comes next for our portfolio is continuing to deepen our relationships with some of the partners that we have the greatest faith in, and helping to build their capacity to continue to do really good things. And that is, we need to continue to see the sector accelerate. James, what would you add to what I said?
Yeah, I would say just being more systematic about the larger pools of capital, because like Peter said, we need more VCs. Most VCs are backed from large institutional pools of capital, and the network of aligned families that have generally been leading that charge are kind of at the limit of where we think we can realistically have them. So we need to start proving that the big pension funds, which control a ridiculous amount of capital, can come in. And we're seeing them come, actually. Last year, we had two very interesting commitments join us alongside some of our partners we can't name names, of course, but from the leading North American insurance companies, which was super exciting to see them come into a first-time fund manager focused on aquaculture for one of them. And one of our ocean tech managers out of Europe is actually very, very supported by some of the more progressive pension funds.
Wonderful. Thank you. Let's move over to audience Q&A. Steve is asking a question about the role of government. Both of you talked about the need to crowd in more capital, different pools of capital. Is there a financial role for government, maybe beyond the policy and regulation sphere?
Yes. I mean, that's yes,
Go ahead,
and
Jim.
there's no shortage of need there. And the blue bonds example that Peter mentioned was a really good example of how partnering with a government will be essential when we think about accessing public pools of capital, whether it is truly sovereign or not. The United Nations grant window for the Global Fund for Coral Reefs is almost 90% funded by sovereign commitments with Canada, UK, Australia. Peter, jump in. You're closer to that one than I am, which was really powerful and got that thing moving so effectively in its early days. And then that crowded in a lot of the other family offices and a few other pools of capital as well. We are seeing the DFCs come in with kind of Canada and the UK leading the charge in oceans, directly investing in projects, of course, like they usually do with the development mindset, but they are also now beginning to commit to fund managers that have outsized economic development for scaling the technology, which is something we would love to see them do much, much more and hope to.
You know, there was a comment posted in the chat around the current administration and oceans, and I think that is, or sorry, not the current administration, but the new administration coming in and oceans. And what's really interesting is, I think, and James can talk about it more on the energy side, but with oceans, I don't know the extent to which things will roll back in the United States as under the next administration. There's some talk that things will shift, but it's hard to predict exactly where it will go. The first Trump administration was a promoter of aquaculture opportunity zones, and so there could be some opportunity there. There's also, if you read the Project 2025 document, there was some talk about disbanding NOAA. So I think it's hard. It's a little bit hard to predict exactly where it will go. But I do think in terms of the international and global community, there's a lot of political momentum for change, whether that's the plastics treaty or other things that could be really powerful in terms of continuing to mobilize capital in service to good.
Wonderful. Madeline, welcome back. Can I hand over to you for the remainder of the Q&A?
Problem here. So a completely different question now, Peter and James. How do you anticipate using AI to support your investing and data gathering?
Fun question. We have not been overly sophisticated with how we capture data, and we are privileged to have so many different fund managers in our portfolio, which come with really good market insights like valuations, customers, price points. So we can build one of the most sophisticated economic databases, and then, of course, impact metrics alongside that. So we are building out our data science team here at Builders, and we will next year be focusing on how do we syndicate, because that's one of our best advantages as a family office is that we can act almost as a convener of some of the larger pools of capital. And if we have a better sense of who's invested in what through our direct knowledge, whether it's just pulling in all of our cap tables and assessing who's invested in who and when and what they probably were looking for, to what can we pull from public data sources, like a North America pitch book kind of has all the private investment data from the more venture-like community. So we can start harnessing a lot of those databases. We're hopefully going to be able to be a lot more curated. And when we show up to things like UN Oceans in June, we're going to be likely convening a lot of these larger investors and just being able to curate a lot more of what we're presenting to them. How we're presenting it will be very, very helpful because we are really trying to show how big the sector is from how many industries are actually impacted by ocean activity or changes within the ocean. And a lot of that's really nuanced within the data sets that are out there and disaggregated.
Thank you. And to those of you on the call, watch this space, because here at TCI, we're actually just kicked off a new project exploring the use of AI and large language models for systemic investing. So hopefully we'll have something to share next year as well to help the whole field. Moving to some new questions now. How do you suggest people working in communities can help to bring together systemic investors, or do you think that's best for private investment firms such as yourselves?
Gosh, it's an interesting question. haven't really thought about. I suspect that the answer is yes. I don't I don't have any particular insights into exactly how. But I think, one of the things that we do know is um, family offices and private capital can be generally more creative and flexible than development agencies, multilaterals, and other institutions. Um, and so there is some value in trying to mobilize the private wealth spectrum of partners in service to the sort of the all the good things that we want to see in the world. I suspect that there's a really powerful community story as well in terms of how you do that, because everything happens in place. But I don't fully have a great answer for that, to be honest. But I suspect that we absolutely want to mobilize all and everyone in service to the sort of the future that we want to see.
Something you touched on there. Virginia's asked, are you seeing other family offices coming in to fill the gap, as it were, between philanthropy and venture capital since your Oceans work was started?
Yeah, so interestingly, I mean, I'll give just one anecdote related to that. We convened a meeting in September of about 20 to 25 high net worth families that all had been doing some or had been doing some philanthropy or um, um, had expressed an interest in oceans, but hadn't really been putting impact investment capital to work. And we convened them for a day and a half with a suite of organizations and partners. And coming out of that, that network has mobilized around a new $50 million commitment of capital for impact investing in the ocean sector. And the partner that we work with, I won't mention them by name, but the partner that we work with said, "What if we raised $5 million for the oceans?" And I was like, "You got to up the ante. It needs to be 5 million per family." And they went out to their clientele and they got 10 of those participants at that event to say yes, with a brand new $50 million potential commitment for capital. I hope that will continue to help the sector develop. It is a drop in the bucket compared to what actually is needed, but for a day and a half, that's a pretty good outcome.
Yeah, I'd say so.
And we're not sure, out of their total allocations within this world of families that we often see, what are we shifting, which is one of our bigger goals. How do we get their big, boring core portfolio that's 30% focused on private markets, 70% public equities, normal long-term portfolio construction. How do we get them to tilt where they're deploying that capital within there? Because they might have the mindset that we will not invest in a venture fund unless it's their fifth fund. They've demonstrated 20% IRRs on average throughout all of those, because we will never see the managers with that track record for another 10 years in this sector. And that's something we're really trying to measure, but that's hard because it's very confidential information. Some CIOs will share that, at least where their sentiment is going. But that's where we think we'll have the most impact within that peer group.
Thank you. Well, as we've been talking, Anthony's been doing some calculations on the back of an envelope here. Very impressive. He's asking, though, of recognizing there's a lot of complexity, is there a kind of breakdown of the percentage between investments, lending, and grants, something like 40, 40, 20, 25, 25, 50? Do you have a sense of that?
It's a good question.
Yeah, I might be able to answer that, James. I think we've deployed on the investment side a little less than $100 million, and our grant budget over that same period has been probably close to $200 million. So almost double that. Having said that,
Correction,
go ahead.
SDG Ocean is still
Yep, that's true.
a larger portfolio, which would almost make this equal. And we're actually tilting now more for the investment with things like the big blue bond commitment, which while the capital doesn't go out the door, it's still a liability on the balance sheet. So I get to say investment's going faster than grant now, and I will rub that into Peter as much as I can.
I think, yeah, you're right.
Great. He's also asking, sorry, my screen's got lost here. He's also curious on the orders of magnitude of internal versus external funds that were documented, but not governed by the effort. For example, of the 2.6 billion outlined, what proportion was governments? Was that included, or is this all private sector funds?
Oh, so this must have been related to the case study and the capital mobilized. And that's when we tried to calculate that, we essentially looked at the 20 impact investment funds and our direct investment portfolio and who else came into those investments and what did that look like. And so that 2.6 billion number was essentially factored based on the ecosystem of 55 unique investments in the impact investment portfolio and who else was crowded into those. Many times we were among the first to commit, and that helped with partners like Swen, Blue Ocean Partners, which launched the $200 million fund. But in other cases, like Aquaspark, we were just a contributor, and we couldn't actually claim that we were helpful in that way. And so we tried to be a little bit intentional in coming up with a number that we thought was meaningful in terms of the catalytic intent that we've had in helping to mobilize the ecosystem.
And
Great.
more specifically, the question was on the countryside. Like it's got to be only 20%, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
We should separate that though next year when we repeat that effort.
Great, thank you. A couple of questions now on a slightly different topic, different levers for change. So Carly has asked, how and when do you determine the public awareness and social norms types of work and how they fit in? Are they prioritized from the beginning or do they emerge at a certain point? And there's also a role here, a similar question from Michelle, which is, what is the role of media storytelling in amplifying this kind of systems change?
Yeah, I think we talk about at Builders Vision shifting markets and minds for good. We do a lot more market shifting work than mind shifting work, to be completely honest. The an example of something that we've done in the mind shifting work was the PBS documentary series Hope in the Water, that has helped tell stories about ocean-based foods in a more powerful way. But we haven't done a lot of that, to be completely honest. And so I think we're still building our media muscle, if you will, as an institution. We're hopefully going to launch a new partnership in 2025 with National Geographic that will also be helpful in building sort of the mind shifting component of our work. But it's fair to say that is less evolved, I think, than what we've been able to do on the market shifting side of things. James, what would you add?
Yeah, we're, as Peter said, really trying to begin to flex that muscle. We are now pulling in our communications team, which was initially meant to be very, hey, this company's got a press release, let's help amplify it, normal kind of business concern. We're trying to help integrate them into our North Stars so they can join us when we think about the Nat Geo type partnerships. What are we seeing as a systems friction? How can we use other types of capital through these partnerships to do so? Other things, even like Peter and I being enabled to engage with the Transcap team is incredibly powerful, we hope. And, for context, this required a little bit of travel for us and a fair bit of time from our side. Not that we drafted this beautiful document at all. We can't take any credit of the hard work. But when you throw in our legal review of the final document, our, myriad of people that have to bless and approve it, it ends up being pretty meaningful time for the organization. And most other offices are not structured to enable that, whether it's the team time on the plane, whether it's having various executive level people assess and comment and weigh in. It's a privilege, and it shows that we're trying to prioritize this, even though we don't know what the right way to do it is.
Yeah, and as Dominic just said, we're just hugely grateful for you for entering into this process with us and to the benefit of the whole field. So thank you. Right, another slightly different question now. How do you navigate ethical concerns from capital tied to sectors like underwater mining, prospecting, marine defence and security, or is this only of concern for local or community stakeholders?
We're pretty far away from ever considering deep sea mining. I don't think there's a way we believe we could do it in a sustainable way. So that's been a very easy, never been really much of a conversation. Every now and then we do see something kind of just more cool robotics tech that might have applications that we are probably indirectly exposed to. So we can't say we won't potentially enable it. But that's been a pretty clear no interest zone for everyone at the team here. And then when we think about things like defense and security, we will have a little bit more exposure there. We're not opposed engaging in defense if it's impactful, and we likely will continue to have some engagements. We have investees that are engaged with the Department of Defense, whether it's through procurement or from investment from various pools, because they are all trying to build more resilient supply chains, which is good from a company level investment standpoint. And holistically, we, of course, will probably never invest in a weapon systems. But, for example, we were looking at an alternative material that's very high tensile plastics. It's polymer, which we don't like things that don't biodegrade, of course, when we look at plastics. But it would alleviate a lot of risk of breakage on things like fishing lines. So we were a little bit curious. This was, I think, 5 years ago. But their main product line was actually body armor because the plastic was so light that it was right at the time when a lot of soldiers were still using those big metal, sheets for their body armor. And we actually were on a call with Lucas, hearing from this founder who was selling us on the investment, and we were immediately like, oh no, we're not going to touch something that like the product is also going into body armor. And we said that, and all of a sudden the guy was like, oh, well, I mean, here's a piece of it, and there was a bullet hole. Well, a bullet had clearly hit it. And he was like, this kid broke his rib from this, and it saved his life. And it's 20 pounds lighter than anything else. And when you're in a desert environment, you often have soldiers not wearing it. So we would say that's impact. It was actually really interesting that the family said, we wouldn't be opposed doing that. That is better for the planet in many ways. It's a better product. It is helping people's lives and having better planetary impact from the circularity standpoint. So long story short, we will see a lot more, particularly in ocean data, that applies to defense. And we're not against it. We, of course, likely will never develop a sub-strategy around the sector.
Great, thank you. We've probably got time for a couple more questions. From Dorothy, she's saying she works with a flexible capital fund that does revenue-based financing, sub-debt and equity and natural resource-based businesses. She wonders where revenue-based financing and sub-debt fit in, especially when working in partnership with other capital providers.
We're trying to expand RBF as a bigger asset class with a lot of these businesses that will, most of these businesses are producing physical assets. They will not be the classic software venture-like growth. And we think RBF is an interesting tool, or similar types of deployment. We use it ourselves in various ways. So we would love to see you guys scale.
Yeah, James has just recently hired somebody who's really excited about putting revenue-based financing as a tool in our toolkit to work. So I suspect we will do a couple of things in 2025 to actually sort of flex that financial tool in a meaningful way.
That actually brings us to a nice segue to a lovely question, which might finish us nicely here. Someone has asked, how would you suggest people can enter this field as a career, whether that's mid-career professional, as a young person who might be interested in finance? And it might be interesting to hear about your journeys, Peter and James, and how you ended up where you did.
You
Well,
want to
happy
start?
to go first. I'm actually ex-oil and gas. I'm a geophysicist. I started in deep water exploration. I was the guy who would say, go drill here. And then the tank is this big. So I moved into M&A because we would be the ones valuing those assets. And it's really a pressure, volume, and temperature equation. So the bankers needed the technocrats like us to come in. I kind of got the bite for finance because I was like, wait, we just valued something at 7 billion and the CFO put a $10 billion bid out there. Like, what the heck is going on? I need to learn more. These people are kind of dumb. I can probably be way better than them. So I spent about 11 years in a variety of roles in the upstream sector. And I had entered the space thinking, you know, we need minerals, we need oil and gas in every scenario. I'd grown up on actually a timber forest project in Ontario, Canada. And I had said, well, I like math and I like being outside and I want to be a good steward of the land. And I can at least help control some of the mega projects. But, you know, you get caught up in your career and chase cool jobs and getting into bigger and bigger projects. Next thing you know, you're not helping. And I'd gone into a very lower market role where we were focused on mature wellbores. And I realized very quickly when I was working on a project that had wooden pipelines still, how fucked up the sector still was. And I thankfully stumbled into Lucas's office when it was S2G was up and running, the venture team, and there was maybe 4 other people. Peter was like a shared resource between a couple of the family members and the Walton Family Foundation. And it was just the right place at the right time. I came initially with the mindset that we'd be doing more real asset development ourselves. We quickly realized that's not scalable for us. We can allocate. And that was right at the time when Peter was looking at an accelerator fund. And I was like, oh, I'm never going to see an ocean-based accelerator fund again. I kind of know a little bit about this. I've got a master's in marine geophysics. Why not? Now I'm like 95 investments deep in early stage impact plays. So it's been a really interesting journey. I'm incredibly lucky that I found Lucas Walton at the right time, though. If this had happened 3 years later, they probably would have said, why would we hire you? And if it had been 3 years before, I probably wasn't ready for it yet. So when we look for the investment professionals coming in, we generally are looking for a translation. So like right now I'm trying to hire for an energy role where we're doing a lot of more advanced structuring than what a typical Series B type energy investor comes with. So we're targeting much more of the kind of credit skill set that's existent in the JP Morgans of the world and the big banks. Because we think as long as we can assess, is your commitment here for impact, you will have this real skill set that we need. And so we're able to move for a skills first approach with our investment team. There's enough allocators out there that we can start pulling them in and direct investors. So our assessment is more, what is your commitment to impact? But it's actually not easy. We find a lot of people that think they might like it. And then the second we come in and say like, hey, yeah, you know, like half your memo is actually now about market development. They're like, I've never thought about market development. I've only worked in companies where it's how fast can your go-to-market strategy be implemented. So it's a little bit more just can you adjust to different business models and have that versatility. But we are thinking a lot harder about this though, because you know you can't assume that everyone's going to go. You know, in the U.S., people go back to business school later, so we get a lot of people having a career of refresh, and that's a good talent pool for us. But that's not a global solution. You know, the US is a little bit odd in that they like 28-year-olds to go to business school instead of the 24-year-olds that you might see in Europe. So we're trying to create a better pathway for that. And we might be putting a lot of resources into thinking about kind of an impact investment. I don't know what we're calling it now, an accelerator or something to help translate those skills.
I have the Systemic Investing Fellowship could be a thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
We should engage that team with you. And then we spend probably equal amounts of time thinking about the skills to lead either our funds or executive level leadership. And that can lead through the workforce development type efforts, which can mean everything from we need more skilled welders to help solar deployment to we need project developers who might work at Chevron right now, but they know how to build these projects. How do we help pull them over? And they often have really cushy jobs and make a lot more money than an early stage company can justify. So it's a big challenge. But if you're interested, and I think that was part of the question in the Q&A, and you're at a job that might not be as impactful as you would like, I would really encourage you, if you're thinking about the investment side, to look for angel syndicates as a way to start getting exposed to activity in the sector. No matter where you are in the world, you can likely find an earlier stage club. We know of a few. If you're in the US, one of my associates actually runs one. It's awesome. There's really cool people coming in, and it's a great gateway to get people interested. And you don't have to really write checks. You can just participate, maybe help out with diligence, and you can start to grow your network, which is the easiest way to jump in, I would say. Peter, what about the grantees? I always find the more philanthropic staff's journey super interesting. It's such a smorgasbord of skills needed.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I guess what I would say is if you're because this sector is continuing to grow. I mean, when we started doing impact investing in oceans in 2018, there were 3 funds on the planet. There are more than 40 now. So this is a sector that continues to grow and develop, and so there will be opportunity for people that have drive and initiative and skills, and it, I would love to see it, grow 5x fold. I mean, for my own personal journey, I sort of, I did philanthropy. I worked for nonprofits for several years, some of the bigger nonprofits in the ocean space, and before I came over to philanthropy. And then sort of impact investing was like, oh, there's more money out there beyond just philanthropy. Maybe I can tap into that and make that, put that to work. And I continue to think like, when are they going to realize that I'm not an investor? Thankfully, I have James to stand next to me to make sure that
I got a job, so
yeah. But like I do think this is an exciting space, and I think for those that are interested in getting into it, there will be lots of opportunities because the sector continues to grow, and people like James and I are going to continue to help, hopefully, it grow over the next 2 to 5 years.
Amazing, thank you. It's fascinating to hear your journeys. So we need to close in 2 minutes. Dominic, any last reflections from you just before we say goodbye to everyone?
No, I mean, only deep sense of gratitude for volunteering your time and letting us sort of take a peek under the hood. And we will be certainly rooting for you from the sidelines, and are excited to see how your approach is going to evolve, how it's going to translate into the energy and food and ag space. And yeah, maybe in a couple of years from now, we publish an update to the case study and continue to tell the story that is 3V Oceans.
Lovely. Thank you. Well, just huge thanks, Peter and James, for spending this time with us. Thank you, Dominic and Jess. To all of those who have joined us, we appreciate your interest. Apologies if we didn't get through all the questions, but please reach out if you've got particular questions that we can still help you with. And do keep staying in touch. You can follow us on LinkedIn, sign up to our newsletter on our website. Same, I believe, with Builders Vision, and we'll send an email out tomorrow with some of those links and the hallmarks document, the Builders Vision case study, so you can dive into it. So all that remains then is to say thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening or day wherever you are, and come join us for the next webinar whenever we have one. Thank you, everyone.